dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special edition, we are talking the big finale at the Supreme Court. It's going to be quite the show. Please do remember, Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com. You can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. And welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special Supreme Court edition, we are talking with Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire. Thanks for being here, Scott.
Thank you, Mark.
So, Scott, for me, this was one of the most epic endings to a Supreme Court session that we've witnessed in recent years. It's almost as though they knew that pretty much every newsman in the business was hanging out for the big cases, like half a dozen really big cases. And they thought, let's just drop them all on the very last day.
Mark, I have to tell you, it's not all about you.
It is.
The few times a year when you general news dogs come and ghettoize yourself and hang out at the court for the latest and greatest updates. Some of us are there day in and day out looking for these scraps that they throw out. Well, the thing that you have to realize is, I'm trying to remember what the case count was that they waited until the Friday at the last Friday in June, which is when they like to kind of clear their.
There were 6 cases, I believe, on that one.
Okay. Yeah. And what you have to remember is, for every case where there is something other than one opinion written, so if there's a concurrence or a dissent or a minority opinion dissenting that's an extra dissent, all those things have to be buttoned up to the letter before they're published. So if one person has one paragraph they're working on, or it could even be as simple as like waiting for a citation from some clerk, although clerk's probably not going to hold up the whole court for a couple days, but there can be very, very much administrative and housekeeping things. And by the way, something I noticed when I circled back from this last batch of cases is there were 2 corrections issued. So 2 things actually went out prematurely. Now, the corrections I don't think had any substantive value of any import, but the court does like to get things right. And as you can see, they still didn't even manage to do that because of, I think, rushing out the door to get things ready. And of course, I'll just add this in a rush, the protester type stuff. If you have a contested case that's going to generate a lot of public interest right on the way out of town, you file it and then you don't have to worry about them trying to shut down the streets around the,
well, it gets people excited for the next season, right? The big grand finale as the courts become Kardashianized. Kardashianized courts. I think I'm going to use that in an article, the Kardashianized courts. But there was some really strong language that I do want to get into, specifically from Justice Amy Coney Barrett to her fellow justice. In one of the opinions, and we are going to get into that. But there are 3 things, Scott, that I really want to use your amazing legal brain to drill down on during this show today. And the first one is actually a case that wasn't really a case at all. It was asking for relief from the relief, and this was the universal injunctions. Now, for me,
or titled in many places birthright citizenship case, which it turned out not to actually be. So
we are going to get to the birthright citizenship, but yes, that was the one. So it was Trump v. CASA, CASA, and the justices there, the majority opinion 6-3, they wrote that it was
Amy Coney Barrett wrote,
and then the 5 others signed.
Everyone else signed on. Yeah,
not everyone else.
No, every one of the. Well, actually, let's fine tune that just quickly and say that, and we'll just say that Trump signed an executive order mandating that birthright citizenship was extinguished in this country, which is to say the notion of if you were born here, you are automatically a citizen of the United States is over because of people who come here illegally or legally, but also are not
citizens of the United States,
or not even residents. Like, in other words, you could just be on vacation from Canada and have a kid, and your kid's a Canadian citizen,
an American citizen, even.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, because nobody would want to do that to their child, would they?
And so Trump signs his executive order. There's a nationwide injunction issued by I can't remember if it was a Biden judge. I think it was a Biden. Anyway, it doesn't matter. A democratically appointed judge, sort of a typical thing that so many Trump supporters are frustrated with, stymied by one district court judge in one of the places where there is such a thing around the country, and then the entire country can't be subject to the administration's goals because of that. Well, the court took the case not to resolve whether or not the order about it birthright citizenship was legal.
We're keeping that in the radio.
About whether or not it was the universal injunction was appropriate. And so Amy Coney Barrett writes the decision, which all 5 other justices in the majority sign on to, and they don't reserve any of their agreement, which justices often do. So yes, in a longer opinion, you'll often see it numbered via parts, and then a justice will say, I concur with parts 1 through 3, skipping part 4, and then concur with 5. And then that might be how they do it. But in this instance, and it's going to be important when we lay out the language that she used, well, every single judge, including the Chief Justice of the United States of America, Justice Roberts, signed on to this part of the opinion. So I just wanted to make sure people had that background before they got the meat.
So let's talk before we move on to what Justice Barrett wrote. I want to talk more about how important this is, that universal injunctions are now effectively blocked, right? So this doesn't mean that there isn't any remedy. I believe it had a carve out for if it requires multiple people to be impacted, or multiple people will be impacted by it. They can always go with for example, a class action.
Well, let me just unpack that for a second, rather than you. Sure. Let's have the lawyers summarize the actual. So they're not banned. Sure. Universal injunctions are not prohibited. What the Supreme Court has done is kind of level set the district judges and said, for you to basically enact a nationwide prohibition, there has to be kind of an extraordinary series of events, which is to say that the person in front of you, the litigant in front of you who has asked for relief from some illegal act, which is what a court case is. They're behaving illegally, Your Honor, make them stop, right? That's the nuts and bolts of it. Only if the nationwide injunction was required to give what's called complete relief to that person would they be able to issue the nationwide injunction. It doesn't make it void or never going to happen, but it dials back by like 100 to 1, maybe, you know, what we might maybe expect to see. And the reason, and you're right about that, they didn't add a new rule or there's no new information about class action lawsuits. So all the justices have said is go through and get a class action started if that's what you really want. The problem with that is that it takes a lot more effort on the advocate side to establish a class and to get class action status, which is why it's much easier, and they don't want to do it, to just apply for, a nationwide injunction. And it's a lot easier for the judges too. They don't have to go through the work of sorting through the class application. That in and of itself is a bunch of work that a judge probably doesn't want to do. So,
well, of course, it's so much easier just to not do work and then just impact the entire country, because that's what judges are for, right? We're going to be back with Scott, continuing this conversation after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.